Good evening, everyone. I am sorry. It's raining here in Melbourne, and just to let you know, I've got a spooked dog for whatever reason at my feet. So tonight's going to be an interesting night. JJ, for those who are unaware, we'll just wait till we get a few viewers. I don't think we've got any at the moment. Nah. We'll give it 5 minutes while I my dog down. Here we go. We're getting a few viewers now. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Eureka Conservative. Tonight, I think I'm going to have a few difficulties. You'll see here in a minute. I've got my German Shepherd. I'll give you a quick look. He's right in my... He's been there for 20 minutes. I don't know. Something spooked him. It doesn't take much to spook my dog. He's a rescued German Shepherd, so he had a pretty tough first 10 months of life. And so any loud noise or anything like that just gets him wound up. And at the moment, we got a bit of rain and me talking and all that sort of thing. So for some reason, when he gets a bit worried, which he shouldn't be, he's a 40-kilogram German Shepherd. He's a big boy. And he's got a bark that would just scare the absolute crap out of anyone. But he's a big wuss. My landlord, when he comes around, he's petrified of him. But this one, he seriously wouldn't harm a fly. He'd scare one with his bark, but he'd run quicker the other way, I think. But he's a beautiful boy. But tonight, he's going to be sitting, I think, right in my lap. So if you see me getting distracted a few times, that is the reason why. So welcome to yet another, welcome again to yet another episode of the Eureka Conservative. I put in my X promo today, my post on X, that on weeks like this where there's so much to talk about, which there is, you'd have to be living under a rock not to understand that there's a lot to talk about. I don't usually get guests on, or I decide not to get guests on because I don't want to be rude to them. And when I do get a guest on, unlike other interviewers, I want them to be able to speak. What's the point of getting a guest on if you don't let them speak, for example? So we want to be able to exchange. I don't want to have to talk over them unless it's really necessary. And in doing that, it just makes the episodes that bit longer. So when there's a lot to get through, I've decided not to have a guest on and just go through it tonight. So tonight we've got yet another policy announcement. We're building a nice platform of conservative policies to take to our politicians. I'm not too sure they'll be keen on this policy. So I'm pretty sure most electors will be very keen on what we're about to announce tonight. But it will certainly tie in. Oh, he's going now. There you go. He's going to go either downstairs or he's going to go on his couch or he's going to come back for more of a pat. What do you want? So here he goes. He's just, he hangs around sometimes, my dog. He's not too sure what he wants. Usually he'd go up on that couch in the background. There he goes. Up he goes. He's on the couch and now he's happy. So he'll sit there quite happily until I'm finished doing this. He seems to have a sixth sense. So anyway, thank God I've got him out from under my feet because that was going to prove to be painful. So, so there's a lot to talk about this week. So next week maybe we'll get some guests back on. I think the guests we've had on so far have been terrific. But tonight there's a lot to talk over, and if I had a guest, I'd be just disrespecting them and not giving them the time they deserve to have their say. So it has been a big week and a bit on a number of fronts. We'll be going over all that. From Albo's announcement to recognise a radical Islamic group. Says he's not, but my view, and look, I'm torn on this a lot because I think, you hear the terms America first and Australia first and all that sort of thing. I've got my little flag up in the corner. I would prefer to be concentrating and focusing on Australian issues, but sometimes you just can't do it. That's the hard part. You just get these issues forced down your throat that everyone's talking about, and at the moment everyone's talking about the Israel and Hamas conflict or the Israel-Palestinian conflict. I know my history pretty reasonable. I'm not going to put myself out like John Ruddock does and claim that I am some sort of sage in world history, but I'm pretty sound on it. So put it this way: I know when someone's talking shit to me. So I can call their bullshit out when I see it. And for example, tonight, I will be definitely calling out the bullshit of John Ruddock from the last couple of weeks on a couple of interviews. I'll be doing another special podcast on that moving forward. I just don't like it. And there's too much of it in our politics where certain politicians, bureaucrats, media personalities, they look down their noses at the rest of us and they think we're just, they're little plebs who aren't educated, where a lot of us actually probably know a lot more than what they would give us credit for. Maybe we know a lot more than what they know. And certainly that stood out with some of the interviews that Mr. Ruddock had. Also stood out. And I find this a little bit, look, I sound like I'm bagging the libertarians all the time. I'm not. I think there's a number of libertarians I've got high regard for, but I think they're being let down by some that think they're holier than thou, that beat their chest, and because they see themselves as the savior of politics, that they can, in a way, I don't think they even know they're doing it, but they talk down to you all the time. That your ideology is not up to theirs. Theirs is the sacred ideology on the planet, the sacred politics on the planet. And, their ideology is like any other ideology, like conservative ideology. Not everyone will agree with it. That's fine. And their ideology in Australia, their libertarian ideology, for example, is not exactly the same as Javier Milei's in Argentina, who's a very big Israel supporter, for example. So ideology can change. And look, you only got to look at the New South Wales Liberals and the New South Wales Libertarians. You can't tell much difference between them in the last election. Where they had a bunch of just former conservatives. Those guys are lifelong conservatives. They're not libertarians, and they just performed a bit of a fraud at the last election. And their results said an awful lot. There are true libertarians out there. One of the ones I've got the greatest admiration for is David Limbrick. Also Jordan Ditloff. Though I was a bit concerned that he followed John Ruddock's lead a bit this week. So anyway, we'll see where that goes. But, just be straight up. That's all I ask of a politician. Don't tell us what you think because you're trying to gain votes or political power or advantage. Don't get us your focus groups. Just tell us what you believe. And look, at times we'll furiously agree with you, and other times we'll furiously disagree with you. One of the reasons I like David Limbrick, for example, the most time, I disagree with David on an awful lot. But I know David, when he puts his opinions out there, he stands by them. And God knows we need a few politicians that do that. Elbow flip-flops all over the place. Before the last election, for example, he said he wasn't going to go down the road of recognising Palestine. Well, yesterday he did it. 2 elections ago, he said he was going to reduce our energy bills, and he doesn't. Now there's talk about the treaty getting put back on the table again, the voice and all that sort of thing, even though it's been dismantled at a referendum. They, especially on the left, but also this applies to the right. They just keep coming back, no matter how many times you tell them no. They're claiming they have a mandate of the current government, for example, on renewable energy. Well, that means they're ignoring the 4. Okay, they won the last 2 elections. Did they win the last 2 elections because it was an election on renewables, or did they win the last 2 elections because their opposition was hopeless? I'd say it's probably more the later. And it's not like they got a resounding vote of support. 36% of the first party preferred vote is not a lot by historical terms. And, it's probably what you're going to need to get, because there's so many more parties, and because of the preferential system, that stupid system we have in place, you can get elected on 36%, especially when your opposition's useless. So, they will take one thing to an election and then they'll lie and flip-flop and do all that. So that's a big part of our latest policy announcement going forward. I'm just personally sick of politicians who just can't look you in the eye, no bullshit, tell you the truth. I just totally over it. Totally over the media who do that, totally over the bureaucrats. They speak in double speak, they speak in all this. And they do take us, all of us, for absolute idiots. So today, tonight's policy announcement, I think if you feel like that with me, you're going to like. It's kind of strange because, you know, I am a conservative. I call this the Eureka Conservative. My website is theconservative.com.au. But I'm finding myself as a conservative putting more and more radical policy and thoughts out there. But I don't think they're that radical had they been put out there, say, back in the 70s or 80s. So yeah, I'm sort of taking a back to the future approach with a lot of this stuff. Some of it is a little radical, but it's to get back to what I believe was the best of Australia, our conservative governed Australia back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. I'm old enough to be able to remember a lot of that. I'm sure a lot of yous are, even though we get slandered as bloomers. All the policy announcements we're doing is to try and take us back. We can't get it all back, but to take us back as far as possible to when Australia was great. And I don't really want to steal the MAGA thing about making Australia great again. I just want to get us back to what we were. Yeah, that's what the guys of all our policies are about. We can't do that without some honesty, without some accountability, without some integrity in our politics. We've got to get that back. Now, they've got to be dragged kicking and screaming. 2 episodes ago, we announced for example, to take on board a republic from a conservative perspective. I believe that's the only way to bring the house down and build it back up again so we can recover to what we were. I think everything's so entrenched in our current setup that you're never going to get everything changed the way you would like. The quickest and best way would be to become a republic, break away from the crown because the monarchy have left us. We haven't left the monarchy. So for all those who want to say, well, you can't be a conservative and be a Republican, well, there's a lot of conservatives in America that are Republicans. So when the monarchy is past its use-by date, and with King Charles, and I think the same thing with King William, it's past its use-by date. Now, just because we can't become a republic doesn't mean we can't, for example, retain some ties to the United Kingdom. But the way the United Kingdom's going, why would we want to retain ties? It'll be interesting to watch them. There could be a time in the future, but you would want to retain ties if I think what's going to happen is going to happen. But we'll see. There's so much water to go under that bridge. So I think Australia's got to stand on its own 2 feet. I think we've got to cut ties with things that don't work, and we've got to look at ways to rebuild and build the Australian ideology, the Australian culture that used to be so great and so welcoming to so many people and brought us together, what unites us instead of what divides us. So that's where we're going to. So that all starts with our politicians. So let me get up our latest policy announcement. We'll go through it. And if you've got any things to add in the chat, feel free. Let's get my glasses on here. Accountability. Here we go. Chat. And here we go. So the Eureka Conservative, the pillar of governance, holding. Oh, sorry, I've got the wrong one up. Let me go back. We're going to miss one. Sorry, I'm still working this stuff out. Part 1. Here we go. We'll try part 1. There we go. So I've let the cat out of the bag. Holding our politicians to account. Part 1. So what we want to be able to do, it's it's long past time that our politicians were held to account. Politicians of all persuasions have misled, lied, and abused their constituents for far too long. Politicians have driven every single budget deep into debt for the sake of retaining power. That's whether it's a state budget or it's a federal budget. The only one in probably pretty good shape is the West Australian budget, and that's only because they've got all the minerals at their disposal. It's not probably because of good governance. If you are a company director or a business owner who behaved in the same manner as our politician, you very well could face jail time and at worst some bad consequences like fines or going bankrupt, all that sort of thing. Yet politicians have rorted the system through things such as free trips, excessive spending, and rorts on any number of things. These same politicians swear an oath to serve the Australian public, yet most of them hold that very public in contempt through their actions. To address this, we want to introduce a code of criminality into public office. So not a code of conduct, a code of criminality. Through this code, any politician or bureaucrat who spends tax dollars in a nefarious manner will face criminal charges. I'm sick to death of seeing politicians just waste our hard-earned tax dollars that you and I go out, we earn a living, we have money taken out every week, fortnight, month, whenever you get paid. If you run your own business, whenever you put your returns in, we work hard for those dollars. We send it off to Canberra and then all the local state treasury. And sorry for the language, but these bastards then just waste those tax dollars on ridiculous spending. It's basically theft. It should be addressed. And where there's any nefarious spending of our tax dollars, they should face criminal charges for theft. Any politician or bureaucrat who rorts their entitlement allowances will face criminal charges. Any politician who misleads the public during an election or through their time in office will face criminal charges. They need to be accountable for the promises they make during an election. Albo promised us a reduction in energy bills and he didn't deliver. Instead, we're going to be getting increasing electricity costs because he has gone and, which we'll come into in a moment, embraced the whole renewables farce and made the cost of living, cost of running a business, the cost of everything just go through the roof. He lied, he misled, he had no intention of doing it. That is defamatory. If a bank makes you a promise and then they mislead you and they lie to you, they face consequences. So why should it be any different for our politicians? Any politician who misleads Parliament or any hearing or committee will face criminal charges. Now, I'm not too sure how many of you know this, but in every Parliament, probably in Australia, but also in most Western democracies, would have a little jail cell of their own. So certain politicians, and what these were used for, they're not used anymore, I don't think, but what they were used for is if you misled Parliament or did anything nefarious, sorry, big word, that's deceptive, corrupt, anything like that, you can spend the night in that jail cell if enough people voted for you in their Parliament. The reason it doesn't get used is because the politicians aren't going to dob themselves in. Because if they dob themselves in, if they get, say, the LNP when they're in government have enough votes to send an ALP person into jail, well, then the ALP will gang up and send an LNP person to jail. So they just look after each other. So this has got to be taken out of their hands. But if you mislead Parliament, you're effectively misleading the voting public. And it happens all the time. Anyone who watches Question Time, you will see them mislead on questions, on answers, the Dorothy Dixes. Sorry, I don't like being treated like an idiot when it's being pushed across. Their behaviour is abysmal. And when they get asked a straight question, they should give a straight answer, not a dodge. So one way you can take this out of their hands, if they do mislead Parliament and they're found guilty of that offence by an independent body, they face criminal charges. There's no excuse for misleading the voting public. The same goes for any Senate hearing or any committee that might be asking them the questions to get to the bottom of the truth. So, for example, all those hearings we had during COVID, or the one that Dan Andrews said, I can't recall. He should go to jail for that. Of course he can recall, and if he's too stupid that he can't recall, well, that man should not be governing our state. Neither should Jacinta Allen. And that goes for LNP. Scott Morrison should have faced charges for secretly taking on different ministry roles. Any politician who promotes any industry, ideology, or initiative will face criminal charges. So, for example, we have Matt Keane, Malcolm Turnbull, a bunch of these people. I should have put bureaucrats in there as well. I'll correct that. The push the renewables industry. Why are they pushing the renewables industry when every man and his dog with a brain over an IQ over 15 understands that there's actually better industries out there to generate energy that would be cheaper and better for business? They're doing it because they have a stake in the game. There's no doubt in my mind that a lot of these ex-politicians have a stake in the game. They've got shares, they've got someone paying them, whatever it is. But why else would they be pushing an industry that isn't in the nation's best interest? Well, if it can be proven that you are doing that, you should face criminal consequences. I'll put this in here. When we say criminal charges, we are talking about jail time, not just fines. So that is one. So feel free to put stuff in the chat as we go through. I'll get part 2 up. Not finished yet. So on part 2, any politician, make sure I've got that up. Yes, I do. Any politician or bureaucrat who promotes one industry, so it follows on from the last one, over another industry that is more efficient, more productive, and more beneficial towards our national interests will face criminal charges. That last point, I should have put any previous politician or bureaucrat. But anyway, any politician or bureaucrat who acts on behalf of another nation's interest ahead of Australia's will face criminal charges. That criminal charge would be treason, and that would come with a hefty, hefty penalty. So we have a number of our politicians who are members of the WEF who pander to certain countries such as China. We need to be really on top of those people. Are they acting in another country's interest ahead of our own? For example, how many ports have we had, port leases have we been given to China? How many plane airfields have been given to China? How much of our land has been bought up by the Chinese? So who are these people serving with our minerals? How many of our minerals have been sold at a pretty cheap rate? You've only got to look, I think it's in Norway, where their gas and oil fields fund a lot of their social welfare programs. Our gas, for example, there should be an inquiry into that. Why are we getting so little back for our gas as taxpayers? So these are our resources that have been sold and shipped overseas, and we, as the voting public, are not getting, and as citizens of this country, whether we're a voting public or whether we're kids or whether we're anybody who's a citizen, are not getting the maximum benefit back from those resources. So if people are selling those off in a free trade agreement where we're losing out and another nation's gaining, there should be consequences again for that. Any politician and bureaucrat who seeks to oppress Australians' freedoms and liberties, I'm sure this will get a cheer, will face criminal charges. So let them, they want to, if they want to do like they're doing through this social media ban, if they want to suppress our free speech, that should be written into a constitution through a, what do they call it? Oh my God. Our liberties in the Constitution. So what do they call it? Bill of Rights. Oh my God. Sorry, guys. Like they have in the American Constitution. Once we establish a Bill of Rights, if they breach that Bill of Rights by trying to suppress or oppress people's opinions like they're doing in England and like they're doing here, they should face criminal charges. Any politician or bureaucrat who spreads innuendo and or rumour to smear and slander another individual, I should have put in there for political gain or anything, will face criminal charges. So right now they can go into our parliament, any parliament, and they can say whatever they like about anybody and not face any consequence for it. That needs to change. There has to be a way that you cannot slander or smear another person's reputation and not have consequences to it. That's fair and reasonable, and you shouldn't be getting any exceptions just because you sit in a parliament. So, for example, John Pasuto, as he found to his detriment, if he had have said that in Parliament, could have avoided it. I can't remember what they call it, but you can say whatever you like in Parliament pretty much and not be held to account. When we say criminal charges, as I said before, we're talking about jail time. There will be more added to this list as time goes on because I've only done it off the top of my head today. So I'm sure I'll think of more. At an appropriate time, we will, if this takes off, we will seek legal counsel on the best way to implement such a code of criminality. Now, I think this will be probably impossible under the current constitution. But what we put on the last time through becoming a republic and putting in place our own constitution, I think if you got the right lawyers to look at it, bada boom, bada bing, you'd be going away. So if anybody knows a constitutional lawyer who would act free and act in the natural interest, get them on to me. Through this code, we will ensure individuals who take up a political or bureaucratic tenure are fully aware of their responsibilities to the Australian public and the national interest. Any charges would need to be applied independently. This cannot be a political game of upmanship. As much as I detest a lot of the politicians, they also, like us, deserve their day in court, and they also deserve to only be charged when the charge is obvious and done by an independent body, not by some other politicians, as we have witnessed in America with Trump and how the gamesmanship was played over there. This criminality code will be embedded, as I've said, into any new constitution established by a new republic. God, how did my words check did not pick that up? Outlined in our previous episodes. So I've got no doubt that this will grow. I've got no doubt outside politicians this will be popular. When we do put this towards politicians, I'm sure they're not going to be very supportive of it. But I think it's an important factor that we have got to get pushed through, whether they support it or not. So there's a few other things, a number of other things that we'll be announcing, for example, that I think can only be achieved through the formation of a republic and the implementation of a new constitution. I've thought long and hard about this. There's a few people, especially the Reignite Democracy people, who are talking about trying to get a number of people to join up with the major parties. I've researched that. I don't believe that's feasible. I also think it will take decades to get where they want to get to. I just think the quickest and biggest, easiest way to get to where we want to go, and none of it's easy, is actually the application of becoming a republic and putting forward a new constitution and starting all over again. There'll be an interesting one coming up in regards to our legal system. I think that needs to change in a fair way as well. So I know there's a few of you that follow me that will love that idea. So would be interested in your feedback as we go from that. So I'll just get rid of that, guys. Sorry. So yeah, that's a back on the screen. That's a pretty cool. Like I said before, well, I don't think it's radical, but I think it's something that needs to be well and truly considered and implemented. I think we're all totally sick to death of being misled by politicians. They do it because they can get away with it. So if there is a criminality code, they wouldn't be able to get away with it any longer. So, and they would also face consequences if they dared try to go down that road. So that is our latest policy announcement under governance. So we're building a good platform. Be interested to get some feedback. I think, well, if you're not getting feedback, people agree with it. So far we haven't had huge amounts of feedback. So, and we've had, a number of people comment and all the comments been overwhelmingly supportive. So hopefully that's the case with this one. Just remember, we want this to be grassroots. We want people to be able to give their opinion and contribute to what we're doing. So anybody who's got an opinion can either DM me, send me a chat, get on contact with me by email and send a suggestion through. And I've got one gentleman who's a libertarian, wants to come on the show. I've got no problem with that at all. I'll organise him in the next week or two. And that came about because of I was pretty visceral in what I had to say about John Ruddock marching across Sydney Harbour Bridge with radical Islamists and Marxists last week. So free speech, bring it on. It has been interesting. Speaking of free speech, my libertarian cousins, as I like to call them, it is interesting how they bang on. They always bang on about free speech. Now, free speech is an interesting concept, I reckon. See, I embrace free speech, but I'm not a free speech absolutist. So if you're going to be saying things that do incite violence, I'm not a big believer you should be able to just be able to go out and say that. I'm not a big believer that you can be slandered. Now, I know there's going to be those out there that'll say, well, you can face repercussions, but do you really these days? Some do, some don't. John Pizzuto obviously did, and that was glorious to watch, but that doesn't happen an awful lot. The level you have to get to prove slander, for example, and defamation is quite high. But I know that because I've looked into it with a lawyer. And every time they tell you to do it, you look to do it. They say they talk you out of it. So more redeeming was, I don't know whether you say fortunate, but John Pizzuto made that case so easy. And how he's still in the Liberal Party ranks is beyond me. And this is what I'm talking about with the accountability. How does a person who's slandered, who's been found guilty in a court of law of defamation, how does he continue to be a candidate for the next election? I mean, this is where Brad Batten, I think Brad's done a pretty good job so far. I'm still waiting. I'm not totally convinced, but I certainly like the job he's doing more than Pizzuto was doing. But, he's got to come out, and he did, and he came out behind Pizzuto. He needs to find a way to get Pizzuto out of his ranks, because that one's going to cause them all sorts of trouble, I think, going forward. But anyway, it's a bit off the subject. So going back to my libertarian friends, free speech, I think, has a few cornerstones to it. So if you're going to embrace free speech, you've got to listen to and allow others to speak. But you've also, I think, got to engage with people who may have a different opinion of yours. So I do find, and I've had a number of arguments with people who bang on about being free speech absolutist. Well, if you're a free speech absolutist, then you should listen to everything. And if you're an absolutist, you should never, for example, block a person because they disagree with you. You're an absolutist. So that means everyone's got the right to say what they think, have the opinions they want, to congregate with what they want. So that means I actually have to tolerate a radical Islamist saying, that, they want to, like one did recently in Oman, who said their Islam is going to reach into every room of Australian homes and into your children's rooms. Screw you, shithead. You don't get to say that crap in my country. So I don't care who you are. That is entirely up to the parents to decide what their kids consume and don't consume, and that's where it should be. Not with a government, not with a religion, not with anybody else. So, funny enough, I'd probably have that conversation. But I get when I've had John Ruddick, Craig Kelly, the New South Wales Libertarians. I think his name's Rob Critt. He's another Libertarian. I've had a bunch of Libertarians block me on social media. Now, I don't think, and credit if he's listening to Elvis. Elvis is one of the few New South Wales Libertarians that engage, so good on him. We don't agree a lot either, by the way. We argue quite hard and long about a number of issues, but he has the correct approach to free speech. So you have to be pretty abusive for me to block you, or you have to be pushing a pretty vile ideology for me to block you. I won't countenance the Nazis. I won't countenance the radical Islamics. Anyone who's going to try and split our country, divide our country, preach hate against our citizens and our fellow Australians, I just won't cop it. It's just me. So if you want to argue about anything else, ideology, sport, politics, anything you want to come on, the environment, I'll gladly take that up. But, I'm not going to do anything that will encourage violence, which brings me on probably to the next subject that I want to approach. And I could upset a couple who come on here. In regards to the walk on the 31st, the march on the 31st of August. Now, don't get me wrong, I've got my Australian flag in the corner. I would love to participate in a March for Australia, our values, for the policy, for a platform that I'm putting in against mass immigration, to freeze it. Our policy is to freeze it for 10 years, not because we're anti-immigration, just to give the country a chance to catch up, to make sure our kids can afford a house going forward, to make sure rental isn't so hard to get into. They just keep pouring people into this country, have done for 25 years. My opinion is we need a decade to just recover and then review it and dramatically decrease it. I think the amount of immigration we're bringing in, and that doesn't make us racist or bigots or anything like it. That actually just makes us sensible, So mass immigration is a ridiculous term. And we've got to get back, if we want to grow our population, we've got to get back to embracing families and kids. Encourage men and women to marry again, to have families. People say you want the white picket fence. No, I just want old values, whether they're Christian values or just humanity values. A man and a woman falling in love and having children. I don't think that is an outdated value at all. I think it's something that is missing in our society. A lot of people talk about the genocide in Gaza. It was quite interesting. There was this guy rapping on dead. I just had an argument with this week on X, and said, there's been no comparison to the amount of deaths in Gaza, which, if you know anything about world history, that's crap, because you've had genocides and conflicts in Yemen, in Syria, in Sudan, even in Nigeria. List goes on and on and on. Armenia, where hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives. So, and I think it's a bit rich, this is my opinion, of Australians to be lecturing, or pretty much any Western nation to be lecturing any other country about genocide. And the reason I say that is under our noses, we have a genocide that happens every single year. It's called abortion. Now, on that, I just did a little stat through Grok, and I asked Grok how many abortions have happened in Australia since October 7th, 2023, I think it was, when the Hamas attacked Israel. Now, there's been around, and you sort of got to go in between, because at one extreme, you're going to have Hamas saying there's 100,000 dead or 300,000 dead or whatever. But it seems from, if you read enough reports, there's probably about 60,000 dead in Gaza, which is a tragedy. How many of those are combatants? A lot of them would be combatants. How many of those are kids? How many of those are adults, women, whatever? Whatever death they are of innocence, legitimate innocence, that's a tragedy. But in Australia, in that same period, talking of innocence, of defenseless kids, innocents that can't defend themselves, that are thrown out in the trash in many instances, we have aborted 140,000 babies, 140,000. And yet we dare to lecture Israel about 60,000 casualties in Gaza. Both are regrettable. Both are avoidable, I think. Maybe one not as much as the other. But we've got no right to lecture anyone about killing innocents when we kill 140,000 of them in less than 2 years. And anyone who's trying to tell me that abortion's not killing, well, I'll give you some land to sell, because you just don't have it. I mean, if you abort a child, you're killing that child. So anyway, that's just my opinion. Feel free to disagree with it, like I say. But I'm not pretty sure. I know I'm right on that. And as a Christian, I know Christ knows I'm right on that. So you guys will have to deal with that and believe the other way as you go on. Hopefully there's not many viewing. So like I said, I have my opinion. I would be happily have someone who's pro-choice to come on and debate it. But they're so wide, so what's that? I have all these words, that I love to use in a debate, but then I forget them. It must be old age. And I'll guarantee you, ostracizing. The debates are so ostracizing that you never get any middle ground. So polarizing is another one, actually. Polarizing is probably a better word. So anyway, as you get older, you forget these things. So, yeah, it's been a very interesting week, and that's our latest policy. So without any further ado, we're halfway through my roughly 1 hour episode. When I'm by myself, I aim for an hour. When I have a guest on, I don't put time limits on, but so far they've gone for 2 hours. So it's a bit brief. If you've got any questions on any of this on the policy I put up, don't hesitate to put them up. But now I'm just going to share a few other screens. Look, one thing, sorry, I should address on those marches. Like I said before, I would love to go out and march for my country, its values, and what it used to be. So, my dad fought in New Guinea against the Japanese. Mum and dad came through the Depression years after World War One. By World War II, they were well and truly in their way to adulthood. Dad fought in New Guinea. He fought alongside the Yanks. Came home, built his own business, had a large family, 10 kids. So I'm the second youngest. So we had some fascinating family times. For example, whether it was Christmas, a birthday, on Anzac Day, when we had the opportunity just to sit and listen with Dad and his war mates and my uncles and listen to the war stories that they used to have. Dad had some fascinating war stories, but you could never get it out of him unless he was around his war buddies. So I especially had a great day when I went with Dad on Anzac Day, and as he was getting on in years, so I wanted to get along with him and meet some of his war buddies and listen to their stories. And my advice, if you've got any, and they're few and far between now, but even if you've got any relatives that fought in Vietnam or Korea or even in the Iraq wars, just sit back and listen. Let them talk. If you try and get it out of them, they probably won't go. My advice is to try and listen as much as you can. And when you can see that they're getting some really, and in war you can have fond memories as well, the mateships and all that. When they're getting towards those parts I want to talk about, just ask them some questions. Dad told us some great stories about the African American troops in New Guinea. They were hilarious. So, some of their fears, as they still do, have about Australia and New Guinea and the wildlife and poisonous snakes and spiders. And in New Guinea, it was the cannibals. And some of the latrine jokes the Aussies pulled on the Yanks sounded hilarious. So Dad had a high regard for the Americans, and he was very big that without America, Australia would not have held off the Japs. So, he fought in New Guinea. He was there when all that was going on. He was with the RAF. So he saw their production and the way they could bring in equipment and all that sort of thing. And he always had something good to say about the Yanks. So never wanted to live there, which was interesting. I asked him that one day. I mean, he talked glowingly about the Americans. When I asked him, well, why don't we move there? Why didn't we ever move there? And he goes, no, America wasn't for him to live. Australia was, but he held them in high regard. So take that as for what you wish. But you just got to listen. And the most interesting things for me in listening was to listen not only to, I never got to know my grandparents, but my parents passed on a lot of information about the generations before as well. So you got to know what the values were of Australians from Federation, from World War One going all the way through the 70s. And I had some fascinating conversations with Dad. And I used to think Dad was, when I grew up, me and my father had a pretty fractious sort of relationship. I don't know why, we just did, as can happen with the father and son. But as we got older, we got closer. And politically, the one thing that joined us a lot, we both had an interest in politics. Dad was very much a John Howard fan, both for the way he was as Prime Minister, but more importantly, Dad was before his time. And I used to write my father off all the time. I just used to think he was a bit of an idiot. But now, as I've gotten older, I've realised Dad was spot on about a lot of things. Dad never trusted the media, ever. He thought they were always left-leaning. He used to call them communist. And when the media used to try and paint a political leader as being bad, Dad always took sides every single time. He did not trust Bob Hawke at all because Dad used to work in the taxi industry at Melbourne there for a while, so he gave Bob Hawke a few taxi rides home. He would pick him up from the, what do they call it in the city, Trades Hall, where Bob Hawke was working. And he knew all the stories about Bob Hawke and the way he treated Hazel Hawke and, you know, how he was a drunk and all that. Dad had no time for him. Dad was very much a committed family man, committed to his wife, committed to his kids, nearly killed him with 10. But he had zero time for Bob Hawke, which is interesting because I ended up voting for Bob Hawke. I never told Dad that at one stage before I woke up. But what gets me about this march and what gets me about a lot of things going on in Australia and a lot of that, what I would say, hatred on both sides now. There's hatred on the right. There's hatred on the left. And if you're like me and you're in the middle, you feel like you're being squeezed in a vice. Now, I was very critical of John Roddick for joining in that march across the bridge, and anyone like him who joined in that march. I was for example, Julian Assange. I was a big supporter of his on X. You know, I communicated through X, which is amazing on X because I communicated with his father a little bit when we got on there, because I would get on X and say he should be freed, and very much embraced his right to speech and what he was doing, and he shouldn't have been treated the way he was. So to see him then march alongside radical Islamists and in front of that picture of the Ayatollah Khomeini, and they all trying to say now they didn't see it. It was a pretty big picture. And you walked across the entire Sydney Bridge with that behind you, pretty confident you saw it. So, you know, again, just educated people talking down to us plebs like we're idiots when we're not. You know, just because I don't have a degree doesn't mean I'm stupid, you know. And if you're expecting me to think that you had that photo of the Ayatollah right behind you, right across the Sydney Harbour Bridge, but you didn't see it, as Bob Carr and a few others put, well, you know, you're just treating me like an idiot. I lose all respect for you. Never gain that respect again. It's like John Ruddock trying to say, oh, well, they're all lovely people, and he didn't see, you know, Australian Arabs, he called them, and he didn't see any Islamists or radicals. Well, you know, as Harvey said in their debate, we've all got eyes, and there's plenty of video on social media of people travelling in trains across the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and they're videoing the entire processions. Now, there was plenty of Palestinian flags. There were plenty of terrorist flags in there. You know what flag you didn't see? You didn't see the Aussie flag. So, you know, anyone who participated in that with radical Islam lost me. But in the same manner, you know, the one thing Mum and Dad used to, and it really is interesting to talk to people who lived through those times. So Mum and Dad's version of the Nazis and Hitler, for example, they've thought Hitler in his initial years was a genius, but in their words, he lost the plot, you know. And I think, you know, typical Aussie slang, was a genius but lost the plot. They summarised 10, 15 years of the Nazi rise and fall in that typical Aussies. But then you talk to him a little bit more. Well, why was he a genius? Well, they talk the way he brought Germany back from the brink of just total devastation, you know, where he had industry cranking, they built the Autobahn, he brought pride back into the country, but then he blew it all by taking on wars and battles that realistically he had no chance of winning. So, you know, there's a lot of people that are trying to rewrite history, you know, that there was no Holocaust. Well, you know, I would love a few of those people to talk to my father about that. Dad was disgusted by all of that, and as we were growing up as kids, we had it reinforced into us, you know, that no government, no country, no politician, no army should ever participate in that sort of genocide. And to have people now trying to downplay that it wasn't a genocide when we lived through that, my parents lived through that, and they took us through it all, and they're trying to say that my father, who was one of the most intelligent men, and still has been the most intelligent man I've met in my life, we didn't get on, but he was as smart as you can get. They weren't going to put it out. He had a deep distrust of media. So the fact that, and he had a great knowledge of history. He knew his history back to front. And Dad researched it. He was brilliant. And he was the person that inspired my interest in politics and history and all that sort of thing. So I know the values of Australians. And right now, and the same thing with listening to all my uncles who came through the same era. And when you say uncles, uncles and aunties, on my dad's side, there was 11 kids, and on my mum's side, there was 9. So I had an army of uncles and aunties and all that. So we were raised with that, and cousins and second uncles and all that sort of thing. So like a lot of me in the boomer generation, to have people now from, they're 20, 23, who would never have ever had a conversation with the people who lived through that, trying to tell me what my parents believed in, is a bit galling. So mum and dad, for example, and again, I could lose a few of you here. That's fine. Come on the show and talk it out with me. Mum and dad were appalled by any real racism. Dad hated the Japanese, for example, but it wasn't because of racism, but because when you're in New Guinea, he had first-hand accounts of what the Japanese army did to our troops and other troops. Every Australian hated the Japanese. You've only got to read any history book of, how they used our captured soldiers for bayonet practice, how the captured soldiers for Singapore were used as slave labour and starved to death, many of them. Just look up your history as to what the Japanese did, not only to Australian troops, but to British troops, to American troops. It's disgusting what they did. So Dad hated them not because of the colour of their skin, but who they were. So, and he carried that with him, I would say, to his death. And I can totally understand it. Now, Japan now is a totally different country, I would say, to what it was then. But you will not find, for example, very many, if any, people from that era who lived through that war that would argue that the Allies shouldn't have dropped those 2 atomic bombs, for example. They were cheering that on. You've only got to look at the videos when they celebrated, Victory Day for both Europe and the Pacific. So, what they had to put up with before then, the atrocities they put up, there was no sympathy for the Japanese. So that's just fact, But at the same time, Mum and Dad were disgusted with the Nazi ideology, and if you look into it, anybody would be disgusted with, if you got a reasonable brain, clear thinking, IQ above 50, you might be a bit below that. But, I just find it a crying shame that so many young people, and I'll get onto this in a minute, are getting indoctrinated by these influences on media that are trying to twist history. So, for example, Tucker has his historian on, he's an idiot, who's trying to downplay Winston Churchill. Now, Winston Churchill had his faults, and a lot of people put out Gallipoli. Well, Gallipoli was, for example, on Winston Churchill's defence. Was that a mistake? Yes. Was it a mistake because the idea was wrong, or was it a mistake because it was executed in the wrong manner? If you read the book by Les Caroline about Gallipoli, there was a lot of mistakes made by some British generals. But the actual, this is my belief, the actual concept of trying to break open the Western Front in World War I, and the idea that Churchill had of landing an amphibious landing behind enemy lines where they could take Turkey out of the war and get to Germany, it was pretty brilliant, actually. It was before his time. Was it executed? No. Well, no, it wasn't. Were Australians used? Yes, they were. Why were they used? Because in 2016, the British were, just read the Battle of the Somme. The British troops suffered as much as the Australian troops, and they suffered as much from the Australian commanders' incompetence as what the Aussie troops did. So, but who broke that command? Who turned that war a lot on the Australian side was none other than General, or what do they call it? Not Brigadier General, Field Marshal. I think he was a Field Marshal. Can't remember. But he was very high in the thing, and he commanded for the first time a lot of the Australian armies together. John Monash. John Monash, one of the most famous Australians, and he wasn't just famous for his military achievements. Just look at what he did for the energy industry through coal after the war. Some of his achievements after the war are amazing. He's got universities and highways named after him, and he's a Jew. He was an Australian Jew. We're getting a lot of the anti-Jewish stuff, and there's you've only got to look up and Google search famous Australian Jews to find out what they've contributed to society. And I find it so distasteful. A lot of the anti-Semitism. Now, not every Jew's a good person. Not every Christian's a good person. Not every atheist is a good person. Not every Protestant's a good person. Certainly not every Muslim's a good person. Not every human's a good person. In fact, probably more humans are bad people than are good people. But what I'm concerned, this is a long-winded thing to go about this march for Australia, is I've got real concerns it's going to be sabotaged nefariously by certain groups for the wrong reasons, and it'll do so much damage to people like us, me, conservatives who are trying to get Australian patriotism back up and going. And if it's done wrong and there's violence, or the NSN are involved, or they're talking about white Australia and kicking people out, and it'll do so much damage, and the media will just paint it, and whatever good we could come out of this will be wrong. So we don't know the people behind it, though we're starting to get an idea. We don't know who the ones are organising it. They reckon it's a grassroots thing. I don't think this is grassroots at all. The video you've got onto there where they've got the voiceover, so it sounds rather dark and meaningful. It's just all dead set giveaway. So, it's a free country. If you want to march, go march. Sadly, I think it's a missed opportunity. I certainly won't be marching in it. There's lots of ways you can get your voice out. I do it every week, Tuesday nights. I get on X a lot. I write articles a lot. I write to politicians a lot. We have an event coming up, which I'll go more about later on. But if you're going to go to these things, be sure on who you're going there with. So to summarize all of this, if you're against people marching across that bridge shoulder to shoulder with radical Islamist or Marxist, then by God, you should have the same concerns, potentially walking shoulder to shoulder with neo-Nazis. Now, if you're down that rabbit hole with neo-Nazis, I'm more than happy to have you on here. I'm more than happy to meet you privately for a cup of coffee, and just give you a bit of an education about what Australian values were from my parents' time, from my grandparents. They weren't boomers. What Dad went through, what Mum went through, might be a bit of an eye-opener to a lot of the young ones. If you know young ones that are going down that rabbit hole, get them in contact with me. I said this, I'll go through this bit with Avi Yemeni's interview with the young fellow that I watched today, who had a debate with Avi. And he was just indoctrinated by the likes of Candace Owen, Myron Gaines. I got no doubt this guy, Nick Fuentes. They're all gifted talkers, but they all have a hateful ideology, and it's not going to unite us. The only way for Australia to get out of this mess we're in is for enough Australians to come together, united about what Australia used to be. And that involves boomers like me. It involves Generation Z coming together. The one good thing I've had over the years, I've coached a lot of young people and a lot of young men, young women. I'm pretty confident I can talk to them and make them understand what it really is to be Australian. And it is not about going back to a white Australia policy. It's not about skin colour. It's not about faith. It's not about, even some of it's not about politics. What it is about is ideology, because politics evolves from ideology. And for me, I'm old enough now. I've lived in Melbourne now for nearly 40 years. And in the majority of that 40 years, I lived in communities that had a fairly high Jewish population. So in my time, in my work and in my business, in my coaching, I've dealt with, just so you know, Asian families, Indonesian families, Asian as being China, Japanese, Korean, Indonesian, Malaysian, Thais. I've dealt with people from Jewish backgrounds, Islamic backgrounds, Christian backgrounds, atheist backgrounds, African backgrounds, Sudanese, Nigerian, you name it, Russian, Serbian, you name it, I've dealt with them. And the big problem isn't about where people come from. It's about the ideology they bring with them. And our immigration policy, unfortunately, has allowed a lot of people with ideology that is counter what traditional Australian ideology, culture, beliefs is. Now, we are definitely based, and I don't see this as even debatable, Australia, not what it was before the First Fleet landed. The Indigenous culture has an important role in our makeup, but Australia was founded by the British Empire, the Australia as we know it today. Australia wasn't Australia until the British Empire landed here. Now, that is indisputable. That includes our Indigenous culture and people, obviously. I mean, that flag behind me, a quarter of it, not even that, is the British flag, which is an important and proud part of our history, but the rest of it is the Southern Cross, which we all live under, whether you're Indigenous, Christian, atheist, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, African, Asian, Indonesian, Thai, Aussie. That's what we need to be living under, and we have to understand, which I put in a past episode, what it means to be Australian, and get anyone who comes here to come on board with that culture, with that values, with those beliefs, with that ideology. And that should be open to anybody who wants to come here and make a go of it. So I'm unlike a lot. I'm against mass immigration. I'm not against immigration. I know some really good people that have come from other countries and made a life here and made a valuable contribution. I am against multiculturalism. You come here to be Australian. You don't come here to be Greek. You don't come here to be Italian. You don't come here to be Palestinian. You don't come here to be Israel. You don't come here to be even American or UK. You come here to be Australian. And any march, as far as I'm concerned, has got to embrace that. Now, the things I've seen on X is not embracing that. A lot of it is going to be about white nationalism and negative immigration, basically deporting people. Now, I'm not totally against deporting people, criminals, people who want to tear down our country, but we're certainly not. I'm not for deporting people simply because they're immigrants and they're not white. So, if that turns anybody off, then that's fine. But that's where I stand. And I'm, unlike what I said before, I'm not going to be a politician who doesn't let you know where I stand. You can disagree or agree with me, but I'll put you where I stand. And as a Christian, there is no way I can turn my back on a fellow human being where I don't have to. Now, if you bring an ideology that is going to be based, and this is where I have the problem, with radical Islam, if you bring an ideology that's based, that is intent on destroying my faith, my culture, my country, they should be out of this country. Yet our government allow them to stay in it. Now, I don't care how you get them out of the country. Australia is a major continent. It has hundreds of islands around it. And we showed this with the boats. We could certainly establish an island destination, even if the original countries won't take them back, and we can put them on there. If you are a treasonous bastard that wants to tear down our country, that flag, our culture, you have no place being in this country. That's just my opinion. So who knows? In 12 months, I might not be able to have that opinion without facing consequences myself. So anyway, so that's where it is. So I've babbled on enough. So this is why I don't have a guest on an I Like Tonight. So there's a lot to go through. So I will get on to sharing my Twitter as I do every single week. Again, any comments, jump on board, send them through. We've got a few more viewers, not as many viewers as we've had in the past few weeks. So I think I'll have to get a guest on. So we'll see what we can do about. What's this got? Oh, no, sorry. Here I go again. Replace screen sharing. I'm still on it. All right, politics. The Eureka Conservative. Let's get through in this week's news. I'm about. Now, here's the, I'll just make sure I've got that on screen. I do not have that on screen. Why do I not have that on screen? Sorry, guys. I'll try that again. Play share screen. Share. Here we go, I think. No. Sorry, guys. Just give me a tick. Stop screen sharing. Now going to screen sharing again. Here we go. Let's see if it works this time. Sorry, guys. IT. When it works, it's fantastic. Here we go. We've got it. So this is the young fella I was telling you about.
They're very evil, and they are Satan.
We'll show
we need to turn to Christ. Christ is King. We need to be good civilians. We need to make the world a better place. And I'm not going to go any more extreme on my views because probably.
How's that extreme?
Oh no! I'm gonna. If I feel like I say what I'm thinking, it's going to be a little bit.
Tell
extreme.
us what you're thinking. Don't hide it.
Okay. I personally think that this is probably not going to get put on YouTube, but I reckon we should probably bomb Israel.
Why do you want to bomb Israel?
We need regime change. Israel have so much control over Western society. The Jewish community has so much control over the world. Look at what they're doing in Palestine. Look at the wars they're engaging with Iran. And I'm a big Donald Trump fan, but I do not support the way that he is conducting himself with Israel, because I truly believe that they're very evil and they are Satanists. They are not Jewish. And
so who are Jews? Who are the real Jews?
Who are the real Jews? I think that most people, if you take a Jewish community, I would like to think are probably persuaded by the propaganda of what Jewish culture is. I'm not that educated.
What's a real Jew though? You said they're not the real Jews. Who are the real Jews?
I would say probably like the average everyday Jew. But if you take like the Jewish,
but 95% of Jews believe in Israel. Because have you read the New Testament?
No, to be honest, bro, I'm a Christian, but I'm not that educated in Christianity. But if I was to take,
so I'll stop it there. It's quite interesting. I feel for this young kid. I've coached plenty of boys his age. When I say boys, anyone below the age of 30 for me is a boy. And as a coach, you always talk, they're my boys. So sorry if I come across there. But he's a young man. He's at the start of his life. He's obviously been out and had a few. The woman there, I don't know who the hell she is. But anyway, I think it's his mum, but she just nods her head. She eventually gets out of there. But I think she's had a few, whether they're beers or something else. But this kid, if you listen to it longer, so he's a Christian, but he's not that educated in a Christian. Well, he just said he wants to bomb the crap out of Israel. I don't think many Christians would go that way. What's concerning for me later on, and you can look at this in your own time, is how many influences he quotes there. Now, if you don't like these influences, I'm sorry, I'm going to offend you, but I just mentioned before, Candace Owens. Myron Gaines, or I think it's Myron Gaines, Nick Fuentes, Alex Jones. There's another guy who was on the Alex Jones show, Shoyer or something, even Tucker Carlson. So you got what they call the woke right. I would call them the hard right. And, it sounds like I'm very much a Jewish lover. I'm not. I'm actually an Australian lover. But I've never had an issue with the Jewish community in my time in Melbourne. I've had a few issues with the Islamic community in Melbourne, but not the Jewish community. So just to hear and this kid got interviewed in St Kilda. So he's in a pretty dense population of the Jewish community, yet he's saying out loud in public these sorts of views. Now, I'm not too sure that's a very good idea, and not a great idea with his mum. And one of his mates comes in later in the interview and he's trying to take him away because, he'll become notorious for this. And I hope the kid doesn't get cancelled or anything. He just needs some good people to take him under his wing and have a good chat with him, privately, So I reached out to Avi yesterday and I said, listen, if this kid ever wants to come and have a talk with a fellow Aussie, a Christian, he proclaims to be Christian, then feel free. So I'm hoping one day, one thing I can do is I can talk, as you obviously all feel here, but I'm pretty good at talking to younger people. And I just have real fears if there's a lot more young men like this guy. I totally understand it. They feel ostracized at the moment. They really do. And they feel there's not a future for them and that life is hard. They blame the boomers. They're blaming everybody. But I think what they got to do is realize that hate's not going to get them where they want to go. Unifying will get us where we're going to go. We're all Australians, whether a boomer, Gen Z, Gen X, Alpha, whatever they call the next generations. We've got to come together and fight for each other. I like this guy. I don't know whether you hear it.
Never threaten Australian children. Watch this.
It's coming in every house in every country. Today here in Australia, Islam will enter every house. Don't worry about the Islamophobes. They can yap all they want. Their children will be Muslim.
I don't care what religion people practice. I don't care what colour you are. I don't care where you've come from. But don't come here and tell me what my children will be. I may as well put you in the same category of people that groom children. If you want to change the way my children live, understand that you have to move past me first. And I speak for a lot of mothers and fathers in Australia, that you don't come to this country and threaten our children, because it's never going to go the way you want it. And that's my take from the controversial coach.
I'll just silence him there. For those who want to give him a follow's worth it, but he does end up with a few explicitives at the end. But, that's an example before what I was saying. about getting, Muslim Islam was coming into every kid's bedroom. So, you can find example after example of it. And my theory on this with the whole, and this is in Australia. So right now in Australia, whether we want it or not, so this is an Australian issue. The whole Israel-Gaza thing has inflamed tensions between the pro-Islamic crowd and the pro-Jewish crowd. And there's an old saying, the enemy of my enemy is a friend. Now, I don't consider the Jewish community my enemy. There's certainly many elements of the Islamic community that I've gotten well with, and I don't consider them an enemy. But I don't see the radical Jewish community threatening to take over Australia like that Imam did then. The radical Islamists have given us every right to be very worried about them and to even consider them an enemy. They openly talk about taking over Australia, building more mosques, like that guy just did then, that we're the infidels and every one of our kids is going to become a Muslim. Hell no. As that guy said, hell no. So, without they burned Australian flags during that protest day. They wrote that they were going to tear down Australia. Then you're my enemy. You don't see that coming from the Jewish community, but you do see it coming from the radical elements of the Islamic community, and even in the moderate elements of the Islamic community, they don't speak out. Now, whether they quietly agree with them or whether they're petrified of them, could be a bit of both. Don't matter. You're declaring your open hostility to Australia. So at that point, you're my enemy. You might live in our borders. You're a fifth column. And the enemy, if you're against the Jewish community, I'm not, but if you are, well, then the old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So the biggest enemy of the radical Islamic community at the moment is Israel. So, you might disagree with what they're doing and how they're going about it, but they're on the front line fighting a ideology that wants to destroy Australia. So as far as I'm concerned, worst case scenario, they're my friend. And you've got that battle happening on Australian shores now. So for all of us who want to, that includes me, wants to focus on Australian issues, whether we like it or not, this is now an Australian issue. Our idiot Prime Minister, and he's not my Prime Minister, and I'm not usually one who goes down that road, but when you buddy up to a radical Islamic ideology like Elbow and Wong did yesterday, you're not my Prime Minister. Sorry, I just cannot accept you as a Prime Minister. I don't care how many idiots voted you in, Elbow, but you'll never be my Prime Minister, and no matter how many terms you get. What he did yesterday was an absolute disgrace to side up with Hamas, and that's what he did. Hamas will use that as propaganda. The radical Islamists in the Middle East will use that as propaganda. The only democracy in the Middle East we're sacrificing. So it's something to go here. I think it is worth, I'm going to be putting together a video. This is John Ruddock. Obviously, he became quite infamous last week. He's got a few takes here. I just want you to listen to. This is his peace plan. Now, I don't know where Elbow listened to it, but it is a pretty dumb peace plan. So let's see if we get it up. It's on Rebel News. I'll just double check. Hopefully this is not the longest one. I don't like the Rebel News. It has all these pop-ups. Where the hell is that? Sorry, guys. Here we go again. Just got to reduce that. There it is. So listen to this for a bit because it isn't.
I'm a humble little crossbencher in the New South Wales upper house, okay? So I haven't thought through the logistics.
I can tell.
Now, what is interesting on this, and Avi had some really good questions. So I don't know how many of you watched it. It did get a lot of views. Avi had some really interesting questions on this, and I like Avi to a degree, a lot more than I like others. So, we all, if Avi watched my shows, he probably wouldn't like a lot of the stuff I say. Vice versa. I like most stuff Avi says. There's sometimes I don't like. What I don't like is his interviewing technique. So that's not a thing on him. It's just his technique. And I think he should allow people to say what they've got to say. And in allowing them to say what they've got to say, he will draw them out more in how ridiculous they are. Now, just remember, John Ruddock, for years now, has said we should be concentrating on Australian issues and Australian issues only, not to be an interventionist. And he just said it there. I'm just a humble New South Wales politician. So why are you jumping into this issue? Anyway.
There's no way in the world that anyone's going to ever negotiate with Hamas. There was one election in the Gaza Strip. Hamas did win it.
Okay, so if you're not, this is what Albo's trying to say. If you're not negotiating with Hamas in Gaza, who the hell are you negotiating with? He's about to say there was one election 20 years ago.
When they were radical and they were definitely pro, river to the sea, but they've shut down elections ever since. If they were really popular, they would have had multiple elections to keep renewing their authority.
But who do they negotiate now with to end it? I don't understand that point.
Well, look, in the West Bank, there is more moderate leadership, okay? And there has been
people
now...
that pay for slay.
Yeah, well, look, it's not perfect. I know that, okay? But I mean, that's a start. Look, I mean,
just so you know, the leadership in the West Bank is not moderate. They have the same goals, many of them, as Hamas. They look down upon the West. It's very much similar radical Islam. And John's trying to put across to a lot of gullible people that there are moderates within the radical Islamic Palestinian groups that you can negotiate with. They are few and far between.
There's a book about negotiation called Getting to Yes. You've got to have small concessions.
But they have no power in Gaza. So how would negotiating with them make any difference?
Well, look, I mean, people talk about a two-state solution. Like I probably think the ideal is probably, a three-state solution. Israel.
That is bizarre. He's about to say Israel, Gaza, and West Bank, a three-state solution. One of his colleagues today argued for a four-state solution. Fact is, there is never going to be a two-state solution because Israel will not countenance it after October 7th. They already tried it by withdrawing from Gaza back in 2005. What never gets spoken about by the media, it's bizarre. And the media, I'll give you an example of how bad the media are. And I'm still surprised by how many people get sucked into the media after COVID. Not that my dog's at my feet. So I still get surprised by how many people get sucked in by the media after COVID. They lied and lied and lied. And in this whole conflict, they're lying again. So you've got no chance of a two-state solution. The Palestinians want to eliminate Israel. Israel does not trust the Palestinians anymore. I don't think they want to genocide them, but they'd be just as happy if they move somewhere else, like Egypt, Jordan, Syria, all these countries that border them that won't take them in. Now, why is that? But Ruddock seems to think not only can we have a two-state solution, we can all of a sudden magically have a three-state solution. Who the hell's governing Gaza? Jackie Lambie this week, she wants blue hats. That's a UN peacekeeping force to go into Gaza to manage it. You are asking for troops from overseas to put boots on the ground. That would include Australian troops and be the target of a mass terrorist. These people over here that think they can solve this are insane.
West Bank, Gaza. I think you're probably right.
And who do you negotiate with in Gaza? Because this is your solution. You're the one that is marching for it.
Yeah. So. Well. Okay. Well, look. If I was the dictator of the world, what I would say.
So now John wants to go from being a humble New South Wales senator to being dictator of the world. I mean, these are the problems you get in when you march with Islamists and Marxists. You've got to be accountable for it. If you watch John's body language, if you ever get to watch this whole interview, Harvey cut him off too much, but John's body language was just a person who was really angry. Now that gets me two things. He's another one of these elitist politicians who cannot be challenged by what he considers a pleb. John would consider Harvey a pleb, uneducated. So basically, if you don't have a degree or don't come from academia, you're a pleb. And how dare you disagree with him? The other part he'd be angry about is John's used to having snowflake interviews where he gets just cheap, easy questions to answer. All of a sudden, because he's taken this stand, he's done the 180, he now has a bunch of people questioning him, and he's quite angry about it.
We go back to what I said should have happened 2 years ago. Look, I suspect there's probably 2-3 dozen poor Israeli hostages right now. I think about them every day. You may not believe me. I do. I know it's unbelievably terrible. Now then,
if he thought about those hostages every day, he never would have marched across that bridge.
You've got 3,500 Palestinians, and you know what, Avi? I bet you're right. I bet they're in those Israeli jails for doing bad things. I'm sure, and the Israeli hostages are completely innocent people.
So John wants to release terrorists.
Well aware of that. We've got to make some compromises. So what I would say is, okay, you can have
Compromises
back
with
all
who,
your...
though?
Well. I just said, what if I was the dictator of the world? This is what we'd do, right? We would switch them back, okay, and then we would then there should be a Netanyahu should regret pumping up Hamas, and then
He regrets it. He regrets it. You got him. You caught him out. You regret it. But you're saying not to negotiate with Hamas. That's what you just said to Rukshan. But you haven't given us an example of a situation where Hamas
we
is
should
not
have an
involved.
election. We should have an election in Gaza. Okay.
Are you going to run the?
We should have an election in Gaza. John so far wants a 3-state solution. He wants Israel to release 3,000 terrorists back into the general population of Gaza. He then wants to have an election. How the hell you organise an election? Hamas, all the polls there show Hamas would romp it in, but he's putting 3,000 terrorists, Hamas supporting terrorists, back in the populace before an election, so you could have one. What does he think those 3,000 terrorists are going to do in Gaza before an election? They're going to put a gun to every family's head to vote for Hamas. I mean, the delusion this guy has, and this is your humble New South Wales senator who hasn't got a solution. It's crazy.
Election? Why do you think there's not been an election for 18 years?
Should be. Well, the first thing we need to do, we can't have an election while people are starving and cannot access hospitals. We've got to sort of flood the place with, proper aid.
So just so I clarify, your solution is not to negotiate with Hamas, to give them back all the people on remand for terrorist, the 3,000 people or whatever, who are currently awaiting trial for terrorist acts, give them back to Gaza, withdraw, they'll give the hostages back, and somehow you believe that the group that's been there for 18 years and hasn't run an election are going to be like, okay, I agree to an election now. That's what you...
Well, I would think that what would happen is that there would be, we could get the UN involved, okay, or something.
Oh, they've been really great.
The UN. I mean, the UN. Who's he going to say next? The WEF? The UN is as corrupt and as biased as you possibly can get. They should be the last group we should be getting involved in any election. So, I mean, you can go and watch the rest of this. It is bizarre beyond belief. You can agree with John if you like. That has to be the most ridiculous statement to make. If you are going to march across a bridge with radical supporters of a radical terrorist group, then you better have a better answer than that. That is, I mean, I used to I'll give you a story about John. I used to really admire John. John was a member of the Liberal Party and he wrote a book to try and change it. Bizarrely, on his website to this day, on his libertarian website, he is still giving away free copies of the book, How to Change the Liberal Party. I mean, how does that make sense? You're a libertarian politician who's been voted into Parliament because of the libertarian support, but you're pushing a book to promote another party. Don't believe me? Go look at his website. You may take it down. Who knows? But it was up there very recently, like a week or so ago. Now, I used to communicate. I got cancelled off Twitter at one stage under my normal name. And I came back as the Conservative. But before that, me and John always engaged on what was then Twitter. And like always, like nearly on a daily basis, so much to the point, John was trying to change the Liberal Party. By this time, I'd left the Liberal Party. I wasn't a member. I just voted for them all the time after Abbott got knifed and when Turnbull took over. And that was it for me. I was off and I joined the Liberal Democrats there for a little bit. And I kept telling John, you'll never be able to change the Liberal Party, not with the current politics has got. And he assured me it could. And there was a way. I mean, if you just listen to his solution to Gaza, you realise he's got no idea. But it got to a point where John actually rang me. We exchanged numbers and he gave me a call. And it must have lasted for 90 minutes. At this stage, John was pretty excited about changing over. He'd made his decision to leave the Liberal Party and join the Liberal Democrats. Now, this all happened pretty much as I made the decision to leave the Liberal Democrats because there was a few. David Limbrick actually convinced me of this because there was one live stream that he gave an outstanding speech on what it meant to be a libertarian. And even though they would accept conservatives within their ranks, there was significant differences. And after David explained those considerable differences, I realised then I couldn't be a libertarian. So I left, because otherwise, again, like I said at the start of this episode, I would have been a fraud. So I was leaving the Liberal Democrats as John was joining. He was trying to convince me to stay in and help him work and build the party. And I just said, no, I couldn't do it. I said, good luck. I said, but how can you go from being a conservative Liberal into being a Liberal Democrat? You know, they're about to become the Libertarians. But he jumped all in board, and now he's, you know, had a total reformation, you know, of his ideology, and he's a pure libertarian, or at least that's what he claims. But then he recruited Craig Kelly. Now, God bless Craig Kelly. You know, during COVID, he was a warrior. But him standing as a libertarian was never going to be successful, because he's not a libertarian. He's a hardcore conservative. And every time I pointed that out, I mean, I got cancelled by the libertarians because Craig Kelly first blocked me, because I just used to ask him what was his conservative policies. Had he turfed him, you know? Had he tossed him overboard? What did he do with his conservative values, which he would never answer? And I kept pulling him up. And, you know, if you're a libertarian, you've got to engage in free speech, engage in conversation, debate, and discussion, which I totally support as a conservative. But Craig and John never wanted to do that. And you used to get absolutely canned by both of them, to the point that I first had Craig Kelly block me. And then recently, as I outlined in my last episode, John then blocked me. So these great champions of libertarian, of free speech, of debate and discussion block you simply because you take an opposing view. And not only do that, they abuse you. Craig Kelly called me controlled opposition. John called me dumb, which is no big thing. But, you know, I hadn't said anything that was dumb. In fact, I actually, John, what was inconvenient, I think, for John, is John was bringing up the President Eisenhower's warning about the deep state. And in that warning, he was trying to connect that with the way Israel was behaving today. The problem with that is that was in 1961, only just over a decade after Israel was formed, and well before any real deep state had formed within Israel, and Israel was just fighting for its very survival. It was only 6 years before they had the 1967 war, with multiple Arab countries were effectively trying to push the Israelis into the Mediterranean Sea. So it couldn't have possibly been a link. And I pointed that out, so I got accused of being dumb. I wasn't dumb. I was just a pleb who knew a lot more than what John was hoping. And because I was negating his argument, he saw no other way but to block me. Then that would take me off the thread, and, you know, I couldn't dispute what he's saying, because John, like so many politicians and so many bureaucrats, has to be the smartest man in the room he enters, even if he's not. He's that sort of person. And that, I am sure, I've dealt with those plenty of times. So I find it quite disappointing. I used to highly respect John. I don't respect him anymore. And there's a number of others on that same boat. So if that loses me, people, that loses me. But I cannot respect the person that supports or even looks to support radical Islam. So anyway. All right, next one. That was Netanyahu. This guy's interesting. So, for example, these are the people that John walks with. Interesting. If Australians were guilty of ethnic cleansing, how does this guy exist? It's interesting. He said he comes from West Australia, and he said, the colonisers and how bad we were. No doubt. Obviously, there was bad things happen. I've got no doubt there's bad things happened before any colonisers got here between Indigenous tribes. They would have fought their own wars. They would have killed each other. They would have entrapped each other. They would have tortured each other, because that's what humans do. But, the colonisers that he's so pissed off a bit, he's saying we took their land. How much of Australia is now reserved through land rights for Indigenous communities? He comes from West Australia, which has large chunks of it committed to Indigenous communities through land rights. He's probably, the clothes he's wearing, the house he lives in, the plane flight he got over to this protest was probably all funded by royalties they get from mineral exploration and exports because of those land rights. He's got a pretty good gig. If we wanted to oppress him a bit harder, how the hell is he sitting in Sydney in front of a big crowd with no Australian flags, calling us colonisers, allowing him his speech and saying Australia should be destroyed? So that's what we're dealing with. That's what we're dealing with, and that's what John marched for. So here's John again. I don't think I'll go that one. This guy, if you can ever listen to him, is brilliant. He calmly expresses opinions. He's not an Israeli shill. He's not an Islamic shill. He's not a Palestinian shill. He just is really concise. Coleman Hughes, I think he's on TikTok. He's very, very well, very much worth watching. This lady, she's very good as well, but I won't go into her. These are the very same people that John marched with across the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Core message of that is a lot I agree with, but I do think it's been hijacked a bit by people with nefarious things. So anyone who loves that flag, that's something we'll be putting in, a law to make the burning of our flag illegal and, again, face criminal charges. The biggest idiot, he's not my Prime Minister. Don't care about him anymore. We haven't had a good Prime Minister, probably, I would argue, Abbott, but he was only there for a short period amongst a bunch of idiots. We haven't had a decent Prime Minister since Hawke and Howard. And look, they both had their faults, as I said before, but they were decent Prime Ministers. I'm just trying to find, I might have gone too far. Oh, I know where I've got it. Just bear with me, guys. Just got a couple more to finish off with, then we're done. Stop screen printing. There's my ugly face again. Sorry, won't be there long. Where am I? The Eureka. Here we go. Share. Getting better. This is interesting. I don't know how many of you follow Nick Fuentes. I was not aware of this. This is Nick Fuentes on January 6th. We are taking the capital back. Keep marching. Don't relent. Break down the barriers and disregard the police. This capital belongs to us now. As Milo put, how has he not been arrested? A lot of other people, hundreds of them, went to jail. Some died in jail. Some have been docked. Some were treated woefully in jail. How, with all the drama that was around January 6th, how did Nick Fuentes manage to keep out of jail? Mike Shark's an interesting question there. I'm not too sure he's as clean cut as he likes to make himself. Get onto my feeds. These are all linked on there. You can get this is just tells you how to get your own flag. Won't go on that. That takes a while. Won't go on that. That takes a while. Now, this I got to play this because this is incredible. Sorry, incredible.
And not retaliate. Now, the most famous Jew in history, the greatest human being in history, in my view, was a little guy called Jesus, and he taught us de-escalate, don't retaliate. And that's what. Now, this is if we don't. At some point, someone has to say, let's not retaliate. Now, if Israel had said that, they'd be the most popular country in the world.
Would you apply this logic?
So John is saying there now, and John is a peacenik. He doesn't think there is ever a just war. Now, there is a lot of unjust wars, that's for sure, but there are a lot of wars that are necessary. So if Australia had have had John's attitude back in the 1940s, we would be a colony of Japan by now, and we'd all be speaking Japanese. Actually, no, we wouldn't, because most of us would probably be dead or in concentration camps. So, or labour camps, probably more with the Japanese. But John is saying that Israel, after being attacked by Hamas, having, 1,200, 1,500 people killed, having a number taken hostages, God knows how many raped, after all being live streamed by Hamas terrorists. It's amazing that some people are saying this was false when it got live streamed. He's saying Israel should have done nothing. It should have just simply allowed it to happen and not taken them on. Now, if you're a Hamas terrorist, Hamas fighter, and there was no response, what would you do then? You'd probably go harder. You'd launch more missiles. You'd be going new beauty. I mean, there was a really good Will Kingston on the Andrew Bolt show tonight. He said a lot of people in the West just don't understand. These people in the Middle East don't think like we do. This is John Ruddock's problem. He thinks that if Israel hadn't responded, that Hamas would have sung Kumbaya and stopped attacking Israel, that the world would have come on board on their side. So, I mean, if we had had Indonesia, and you've got to multiply this by at least 3, because Australia has 3 times the population of Israel roughly. If we had 3,000 to 4,000 people killed, raped, murdered, and 750, close to 1,000 people taken hostage, of which nearly half died in being imprisoned in hostages in dark tunnels in Indonesia, would we have sat back and said, bad luck? You know, we are holier than thou. We'll turn the other cheek. Now, I'm a Christian. Jesus Christ was the Son of God for a reason. He did things that none of us could do. And he forgave people for things none of us could forgive for. But we are also a Christian nation. If we allow Islamic nations to enter our borders, to attack us, to conquer us, are we doing a service to Christianity, or are we allowing it to be torn down? So I'm a bit of a Christian warrior. There are times you don't want to go to war, you don't want to do things, but there are times, and God himself, God the Father, not God the Son, God himself wiped out enemies of Israel, of his chosen people. Christians are now his chosen people. I've got no doubt there was an element of Christianity in overcoming the Nazis and then overcoming communism. I'm hoping that same Christianity, those elements, will overcome radical Islam. But there's always going to be someone to come for you. So, as Trump says, peace, truth, strength. John thinks all of it will get resolved by doing nothing.
If it happened in Australia, if there was a terrorist attack in Australia where 3,000, over 3,000, maybe 4,000 Australians were killed, a bunch taken hostage, there's probably 1,000 taken hostage, would you also agree that we should just not retaliate?
Well, look, after 9/11, I was so angry. All I wanted to do
I'm talking about in Australia. You can't. That's in America. If that happened
after October 7th, after October the 7th, I was all up for I was so horrified by it. Okay, so it's hard in the heat of the emotion of the moment.
And when it's your people, yeah.
But we've got to try and work out what's the best thing for the future. Now, I think that is thinking soberly. Now Netanyahu could have got the Nobel Peace Prize. We could, if we didn't retaliate.
So Netanyahu's got to be more consumed about getting the Nobel Peace Prize than defending his people. I've been talking to an idiot.
Retaliate.
If he did it your way, if he just capitulated to terrorists.
We could have then had a really...
You're willing to capitulate to terrorists. That's why you're willing to march with them to conquer the harbour bridge.
Okay, so people didn't take that suggestion about not retaliating and having a serious peace deal, and here we are. We've got it destroyed Gaza. We've got Israel, very sadly on the nose. We've got an anti-Semitism problem erupting. So what's the better alternative? What's the better alternative?
You're assuming
the alternative was to not retaliate.
You are assuming in all of that. So one, Israel's had two objectives the whole time. One is to get rid of Hamas's power so that they can no longer commit atrocities that they've promised to do time and time again.
So I'm going to save Harvey the thing here. There is a solution to this, and that is to let Israel off the leash. Simple as that. Let them go and do what they've got to do to destroy Hamas. Sadly, that will mean a lot of innocent casualties. But until you absolutely destroy Hamas, you'll never have peace in that region. And the world community always stops Israel from doing what they need to do. Australia should butt out. America's sort of too tied in to be able to butt out. The UK, France should butt out unless they're prepared to take the Palestinians into their countries and put them in there and let Israel get on with destroying Hamas. It's as simple as that. It's got nothing to do with us. It's got everything to do with Israel. It's got everything to do with the Palestinians. Let them sort it out. Why did the Hamas go in there? Because they were relying on useful idiots like John saying exactly what he is and painting Israel in a negative light. And they were hoping that world opinion would come around, and that's exactly what's happened because of useful idiots like John. John has never, ever protested the genocides in Syria, in Yemen, in Sudan, in Armenia, but all of a sudden he wants to travel the bridge for the Palestinians. If you're doing that, then secretly underneath all this, I do believe that you're probably anti-Semitic. So, and you don't have to be a Jewish lover or anything to come to that position. Just ask yourself the question, why is he only protesting this one after years of saying he would not be an interventionist? In fact, John has gone as far to say that Australia, and this is naive, it's ignorant, and it's dangerous. He said Australia should become the Switzerland of the Pacific. So for those of you who don't know Switzerland is an historically neutral country in Europe when there's been major wars. But the reason it's historically neutral is it really is only a very small country. It doesn't have much in the way of minerals or, precious goods to mine. In fact, it's a beautiful country that no one would want to destroy. But it does have the Swiss bank and a lot of financials in there. So it's not a big player militarily or strategically in Europe, but it is a great way for diplomats and politicians to be able to go and negotiate, discuss treaties, surrenders, all that sort of thing. And as the Nazis did in World War II, to store their stolen loot from all across Europe, not just Jewish loot from France, from Russia, from every country on the European continent. And it is still to this day, much of it stuck away in Switzerland. So John thinks it would be a good idea for Australia to be that sort of country. Well, that is naive, it's stupid, and it's ignorant, because Australia is a tantalizingly good target, because strategically we're important. If, for example, China wanted to take over Australia and it could manage to do it, it would have total control of the sea lanes through the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, where the bulk of goods get transported. Militarily, it's a massive asset. You would dominate the Pacific. You would be a threat to America. You would be, if you could take Australia, every other nation in the Pacific would basically bend a knee to China, for example. So to try and say it would be the Switzerland of the Pacific, it's just so stupid. But John thinks it's feasible, just like it thinks it's feasible. Don't retaliate if you get attacked. That's like if a person, let's say one of these gang members breaks into my house with a machete and a gun, and I have a chance to retaliate, throw my defense out the window, so whether that's a bat or a knife or whatever, get down on my knees and ask for forgiveness and beg for my life. And, chances are I'm probably a dead man. So you've got to be able to defend yourself. The bizarre thing about this with the libertarians in Victoria, the libertarians are asking for the castle laws. The castle laws are where you have the right to defend yourself and even take an intruder's life. But John is now saying Israel does not have that same right. So Hamas broke into their borders. They killed a bunch of their people. They stole a bunch of their goods and their people. But John is saying as a libertarian, that Israel doesn't have the same rights he would give each of us as a citizen through the castle laws. So if you're confused with all that, so am I. So that I just had to go back with John on that one this week. So there was a few. So still no chats, everybody, though the viewership's going up, which is good. We'll go through just a couple more on politics, and then we will call it a night. Where am I? Here I go again. What have I done there? Oh, here we go. Get out of that. There's a few this week we have with John and Harvey. I did listen to that. This guy was worth listening. He was talking about the fall of Afghanistan and how bad it was. He was a veteran. Definitely worth the listen, that one. There's been a lot of good ones. Love this. Trigonometry. I reckon it's one of the best podcasts other than the PBD podcast. If you want sensible discussion and debate, Constantine, I don't remember the name of his mate, but they took it to Piers Morgan and made him look like the idiot he is. It was brilliant. And this is them again with Piers Morgan. There's a better one going about at the moment. He's the PBD podcast. Really, really good. If you can ever get, that goes for an hour 43, so I'm not going to go through it now. But that was a really good episode. This is going back a bit now, so I won't go into those. I'll get back into my Eureka Conservative. That's where I put most of that stuff. But the podcast this week from Trigonometry with Tommy Robinson is well worth a listen. If you want to see why... Sorry, I've got to get back in here. If you want to see replace screen sharing, just give me a tick, guys. All right. If you want to see a hero, if you want to see the sort of person that needs to be leading, I don't think I've got it here. I should have had it here. Who should be leading an Australian march? We need a Tommy Robinson type. So this year they're talking about the Aussie flags. You saw the terrorist flags that they had there. That's my mate again, Coleman Holmes. Yeah, so I've been through most of these. I'm just trying to find one that was worth a talk. No, we went over all that last week. I think could be our future Prime Minister. The sooner he knocks off Susan Ley, the better. I think Susan Ley's a nice person. I think she means well, but she's not a leader, and she can't take it to elbow in the AAP. She'll never be able to do it. So, that'll probably do me for my Twitter sharing this week. I didn't get as much in there as I'd hoped. It's been a pretty busy week, and today I had all my power get cut off because I had a fuse box go. So that was entertaining in itself. And I didn't have any power. So I spent most of my day doing a normal Aussie thing of trying to get my fuse box fixed. So that took me 5 hours. So I had to figure out what the problem was. Luckily I got it sorted because all my food in my fridge and milk and all that would have gone off, but it didn't, thankfully. So next week we'll come back with another announcement. Don't know how big it'll be. I was going to say a big announcement. I'm getting used to these big announcements on policy, but we'll certainly put another one. Now, what I would say, I nearly forgot. I am so sorry. I just want to give one of our things a plug here. Where is it? Eureka Conservative. Just give me a tick, guys. I have got... Oh, that's not it. Oh, damn. Don't say I don't have it. Here we go. I do have it. There's two things I just want to put up. So, sorry, guys. I'll just get both of them up. And just give me a tick. I should have had these up already. I do apologize. And here we go. Oh, excuse me. I'm in a big yawn. Been a big day, been a big week. So I'll just get the final two up before saying good night to everyone. First thing, I want to give this a plug. If you follow me on X, you'll have seen this a few times. So this is the Conservative, or the Eureka Conservative night, if you want to call it that. So what we are doing on Thursday, September 4th, commencing at 7 p.m., we are having just a live night. So instead of having a live cast, we're having a live night where we come together in the Hobson's Hotel, 19 to 21 Melrose Street, Sandringham. If you go to my website, theconservative.com.au, click on events. There's a link there. If you can just say that you'll be attending, put your details in. We'll put you on our mailing list. We just want to do that one for planning purposes. No cost for the night. Just turn up, buy a Palmer and a pop, support the pub. We'll be going upstairs to do a presentation, having a Q&A session. But more importantly, we'll be all having a drink and hopefully like-minded people. We can have a bit of a chat together. Even if you disagree with us, come on board and we'll have a good night at a pub. It's a great Aussie pub. Feel free to share this amongst your followers on Twitter or whatever social media you got. It is a great Aussie pub. It's got no pokies. It's just live music. It's got a fireplace downstairs. We can go upstairs, have a meal, have a beer. Their bar is awesome. Their beer is magnificent. It's all on tap. It's some terrific beer, I got to say. So I'll be getting a cab home that night. So get there and we'll make a presentation. We'll just get people to get together in a social environment. We're going to be looking to do these nights regularly across Melbourne to begin with. And if they're successful and we can get some funding in, we'll then look to take it interstate as well. So if any of you are interstate and are keen on nights like this and want to help me get something organised in your area, get in contact with me as you can. So speaking of funding, now you all would have got a DM from me. or you should be getting, if you're on X, I'm sharing with all my followers. So if you're a follower, and you can scan this if you like, the Conservative is part of a company called BNBA Basketball Proprietary Limited. Now, the reason we're BNBA Basketball, that's our main core of business. We provide basketball competitions for junior boys and girls in southeast Melbourne and coaching and training. But through that, we get families, and part of our thing will be also to have media outlets. So one media outlet, for example, services local businesses and just spreads their stories and services, and we support local business through doing that. And the other one is through the Conservative and the Eureka Conservative, where we hope to both directly and indirectly impact on people's views towards a conservative Australia, to a better Australia, and we're going to be doing that through each arm of our business. So if you want to help us, what we do have is we've set ourselves up as a company. We're not looking for donations. We're looking for people who would actually like to have a stakehold in the company and purchase shares through it. So you're not donating money, you're investing money. And if we make this successful, you get paid your money back through dividends and later on being able to sell shares if you wish to do so to someone who wants to buy them. And if we do it really successfully, those shares will increase. So they start at 100, but you can, if you want to contribute more, or even more importantly, if you know of anyone, you might have a boss who shares conservative values, who runs his own business and would like to see government out of his business. You might have a potential corporate you work for, or anybody that you might know that has some dollars, that has conservative values, who wants to support what we're doing so we can build this even more. You can scan that QR code, or you can simply go to our website and have a go at that. So we're not asking for donations. We're actually asking for investments. They're two totally different things. And by doing that, you'll actually have part ownership of what we're doing through the Conservative and the EurekaConservative.com. So we would much rather do that way because it gives value, and it doesn't mean people have to necessarily be giving their money away. You can recoup it once the company gets on its feet and starts making a profit. So, we think that's a much superior way of doing it. So, that's the thing we're doing. So I'll stop, remove that, get my ugly face back there. There we go. So, spread the word on both those. I'm really keen, that young lad we showed, I'm really keen on getting as many young people involved in this as we can. I think we've got to show them there's a better way than, for example, what that young fella was doing. I think we have an obligation to do that for our young people. We just can't sit back and say, well, he's an idiot. He's not an idiot. In fact, if you listen to that whole interview with Avi, he's actually pretty smart. He's just been listening to the wrong people. and he speaks well. And I should know from my young days, he sounded like he'd had a few to drink, all right, but he still spoke very well despite that. If you can speak well when you're a bit inhibited by alcohol, then you're pretty good, you know. So he spoke well, but his opinions were wrong. If you could sway him and a bunch of others into our cause, you can start unifying. If some of us do that, if one of us does that and we can influence 10 kids, if 1,000 of us can do that and we can influence 10,000 kids, we help them going down a rabbit hole that they don't want to go down and this country doesn't want to go down. So through the Eureka Conservative, for example, what we're going to be looking to do, we're going to be doing something every week going forward. So unlike, and listen, God bless everyone who goes on the march on August 31st. I won't be going there simply because I can't trust it. I'm not going to march alongside Nazis. That's the bottom line. And I fear you're going to see them already going to be there. So I'm not going to march alongside them, just like I wouldn't march alongside radical Islamists. The core message that's trying to be put out, a lot of it I support, not all of it. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of it. Now, if what comes out of it is there is a good core group to get involved with, through what I'm doing, I'll try to get in contact and work with them. If it goes the way I fear, then I'm just as happy to be out of it. And just like I wouldn't want to be doing what John Ruddock did with the group that marched Sydney Harbour Bridge. But here's the difference. You're not going to have some random person organising all our events. I'm on the live stream every week. My details are on the website. We're putting out policy every week. We're not just saying, well, we're marching for the sake of marching. There'll be a reason. I've got no issues if ultimately, and in fact, I'd like to do it, if, for example, what we're doing really gains momentum and we get enough people involved to one day, whether that's in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, I'd like to do one before the state election, is we do our march, but for the right reasons with the right people and having some organisation behind it, real organisation. And I think you've got to have your messaging right too. And I'm not confident any of those things are going to happen on August 31st. So I was very worried how quickly it came about after the protest on the Sydney Harbour Bridge because, give the left their dues. They got to that march after 2 years of smaller marches. So that whether you agree with them or not, they're organised, their messaging is good. Not in good in that we agree with it, but their messaging to their people to get them motivated is good. And they have a core, like a large group of core people that will support them and support their marches and do all that. So I just don't think that's something you can get together in 4 weeks. You've got to put it in over a period of time. And through the Eureka Conservative, my hope is we do exactly that. If not, I'll talk to you every Tuesday night and we'll announce policies and we'll organise pub nights and we'll keep building that way. So from myself, oh no, he's asleep behind me, my boy. So he's not saying good night tonight. So from myself and JJ sitting behind me, we'll say good night. Take pride in our flag, take pride in our country, take pride in our history. We have a lot to be thankful for, a lot to be grateful for, and a lot to be proud of in this country. Not so much at the moment, but we just got to push back against that. So hopefully you can join me in those efforts that I've just put up there. For now, God bless, good night, and we'll see you all next Tuesday night, 8 o'clock. Spread the word. Good night, everyone. All right. I've got it.